Of all the people or groups of people I've ever argued with, I don't know if I've ever met a group that argues in bad faith more than people who hate Colin Kaepernick. So in this video, I'm going to debunk what has become perhaps their favorite go-to talking point that they've used over the years to pretend that the NFL's collusion of Kaepernick is based on, air quote, football reasons, and not the fact that he kneeled during the national anthem when he last played during the 2016 season. Before I get into the debunking, I'll give you a brief background of Colin Kaepernick. So he is a former NFL quarterback who played for the San Francisco 49ers, and as I mentioned, he last played in 2016. And during that 2016 season, he kneeled during the national anthem in protest of police brutality against unarmed African Americans. And that, of course, fueled the ongoing American culture war, where on one side you have the black community and their allies saying, "Stop killing us, please." And then you have the opponents on this side who basically said that what he's protesting is not actually a problem and that his kneeling during the national anthem is disrespecting the flag. And so when he opted out of his contract following the 2016 season, no team not only did no team sign him, but no team would even give him a tryout, and he's been out of the league since 2016. As I get into the debunking, I should mention that Kaepernick was the 49ers starting quarterback in 2016, which is one of the many things that make this situation highly unusual, because it is highly unusual for an athlete to be a starter one year and then not even get a chance to try out as even a backup for literally any team the next year. Nonetheless, despite being a starter in his last year, those who despise him tend to claim that he was a bad quarterback and that's the actual reason why he's not getting any chances to play in the NFL. And they love to point to his 3-16 record in his final 19 starts as evidence of him supposedly being a bad quarterback. Now, was he 3-16 in his final 19 starts? The answer is yes. But that is where the truth ends with these Colin Kaepernick haters, and so I'm going to tell you every reason why that 3-16 talking point is stupid and why that is not the best way of evaluating the value of an NFL quarterback, and also why that is not even what's happening with Kaepernick anyway, and I'm going to compare him to some other quarterbacks who don't seem to be getting the same treatment despite the claim of these silly haters. So the San Francisco 49ers finished with a 2-14 record during the 2016 season, which of course is bad, but only bad enough to be 28th, or well, actually tied for 28th worst of all time, which means that there were 27 teams in NFL history that had a worse record during a single season than the 2016 San Francisco 49ers. And so I decided to look at some of the quarterbacks on those teams and to see how many chances they got after some of those awful seasons, just based on their records as quarterbacks in those seasons. Okay, so first on my list is DeShone Kizer. Kizer went 0-15 for the 2017 Cleveland Browns, who went 0-16. After that season, he was traded to the Green Bay Packers. He was cut by the Green Bay Packers before 2019, and then claimed off of waivers by the Oakland Raiders before the 2019 season. He was then waived by the Las Vegas Raiders before the 2020 season, and then re-signed to the Raiders practice squad before being released later that month. He then signed to the Tennessee Titans practice squad before the 2020 season. He was then released before the 2021 season, and then re-signed to the Titans practice squad before being released 3 days later. So it seems like for multiple teams, Kizer's 0-15 record during the 2017 did not factor into their decision of whether or not to bring him into training camp to give him a shot at competing for a roster spot. Now let's move on to Dan Orlovsky. Orlovsky went 0-7 for the 2008 Detroit Lions, who went 0-16. He then signed with the Houston Texans before the 2009 season. He signed with the Indianapolis Colts before the 2011 season and was one of the final roster cuts. The Colts later re-signed him during that same season. In 2012, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers signed him. The Bucs cut him after that season, but re-signed him 4 days later. The Lions signed him before the 2014 season. The next year, they re-signed him to a 1-year contract. The year after that, they re-signed him again. In 2017, Orlovsky signed with the Los Angeles Rams. They released him on September 2nd, and then a month later, he announced his retirement from football. Now let's move on to Steve Spurrier, who himself is a former San Francisco 49ers quarterback back in the 1970s. After leaving the 49ers, he competed for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers during the 1976 season. Spurrier, as a starting quarterback during that season, went 0-12 for that Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that went 0-16. The Buccaneers cut him after that season, and he signed with the Denver Broncos in July 1977, but was released after playing several preseason games. He then signed with the Miami Dolphins, but was released in the final round of cuts before the beginning of the 1977 regular season, and then he retired. So I'm going to finish off this list of quarterbacks by attempting to do something that I don't generally do very well, which is talk fast, so we'll try to make this a lightning round, or lightning finish, I guess. Anyway. So let's start off the rest of the list with Eddie LeBaron, who went 0-10 for the 1960 Dallas Cowboys that went 0-12. He retired following the 1963 season, which I guess means he stuck around for a few years after going winless in 1960. Next up is Mike Pagel, who went 0-8-1 for the 1982 Baltimore Colts, who went 0-8-1. Pagel would go on to play 12 NFL seasons for the Colts, Browns, and Rams from 1982 to 1993, so he had quite the lengthy NFL career despite going winless in 1982. Next up is Gardner Minshew II, who admittedly is an interesting case because he went 1-7 for the 2020 Jacksonville Jaguars, who went 1-15, but he actually had a decent statistical season that I will show you later. But he was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles in exchange for a conditional 6th-round pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. Then there's Mike Glennon, who went 0-5 for that same 2020 Jacksonville Jaguars team that went 1-15. Glennon signed with the New York Giants in 2021, but get this, he has a career record of 6-25 as a starting quarterback on 6 teams over 8 seasons. I'm just going to let that one sit a little bit. Now let's move on to Cody Kessler, who went 0-8 for the 2016 Cleveland Browns, who went 1-15. He was traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars before the 2018 season for a conditional 2019 7th-round draft pick. He was then released by the Jaguars after 2018. Now, Kessler is where my list ends because at this point I figured I'm just not going to find a quarterback who didn't get a chance to continue playing no matter how bad his record was as a starting quarterback in any given season. But as I was looking at those 2016 Cleveland Browns with Cody Kessler, I did see another very interesting name on the list that I should talk about. That name is Josh McCown, who went 0-3 for that 2016 Cleveland Browns team. And get this, his record as a starting quarterback between 2014 and 2016, 2-20. After that 2-20 stretch, he played for 3 more seasons for 2 different teams. To be honest, I probably could have just used that McCown example to debunk that stupid, "But Kaepernick was 3-16 in his final 19 NFL starts" talking point. But I will move on to the next stupid talking point that the haters like to use, which is that Colin Kaepernick got benched for Blaine Gabbert. Now, did Kaepernick get benched for Blaine Gabbert? The answer is yes, but one thing that the Kaepernick haters will conveniently leave out is that it happened during the 2015 season and not the 2016 season, and that the reason why it happened was because Kaepernick was playing through an injury that caused his uncharacteristically poor play during that season. And if you look at his numbers, you will notice a sort of outlier dip in his statistics during that season that you do not see in any other season. But that is not so convenient for those who want to paint the picture that he was a bad quarterback. Because if your whole goal is to paint the picture of someone as a bad quarterback in the service of perpetuating the narrative that he's out of football due to his supposedly poor play, then it doesn't help your case to mention the reality that he earned back his starting position after recovering from his injury and from his surgery, which is exactly what happened with Colin Kaepernick in 2016. And of course, if I had more time and energy to just sit here and continuously talk, I could go on and on about how ridiculous it is that the backups to Colin Kaepernick, all the players who couldn't get on the field because the very coaches who coached Colin Kaepernick, who said that those players were not good enough to get on the starting field because Kaepernick was the better player, had NFL careers that continued long after Kaepernick began to be colluded by basically every NFL team. Now I'm going to debunk the next popular Kaepernick hater talking point on my list, which is that he was supposedly a bad quarterback. Now, there are not too many metrics or statistics that support that case, but for the Kaepernick hater crowd, it doesn't have to make sense. So this is going to be fairly easy for me. Just eyeballing Kaepernick's numbers, it appears that his weakest category is his completion percentage, which admittedly has been below average throughout most of his career, which of course makes it the go-to category of the Kaepernick haters whenever they want to evaluate him as a quarterback. But that is definitely not the best way to evaluate a quarterback's efficiency, so I've grabbed, just like the Kaepernick haters, I've decided to cherry pick my own numbers to give a bit more comprehensive evaluation of his value as a quarterback. Let's take a look at Colin Kaepernick's final season, which was 2016. He threw for 16 touchdowns against 4 interceptions. He had a passer rating of 90.7 and a total QBR of 49.2, and to give context to those numbers, a passer rating of 90.2 in 2016 was about a couple points above league average, and a total QBR of 49.2 is a little bit under the average that is set at 50. So if we were to base his value on his passer rating and his total QBR, he was essentially an average quarterback that year. Now let's look at his yards per attempt, which was 6.8, and his adjusted yards per attempt, which was 7.2. I believe the adjusted yards per attempt adjusts for things like interceptions and maybe some other things, but they essentially measure how efficiently a quarterback is getting his team down the field. So let's compare these numbers with the numbers put up by the quarterbacks I mentioned earlier during their winless and one-win seasons. So it looks like Kaepernick has the highest touchdown to interception ratio on the list. He has among the highest passer ratings on this list. He has among the highest total QBRs on this list. And if you look at the adjusted yards per attempt, it appears that not a single quarterback on this list got his team down the field more efficiently than Colin Kaepernick did. Before getting into my concluding thoughts, I will debunk one final Kaepernick hater talking point, which is that he's supposedly asking for starter money. That one is pretty easy. There's not really any reports out there that indicate that. And so I will now go into my final rant where I will attempt to psychoanalyze the Kaepernick haters. Why do Colin Kaepernick haters constantly judge his win-loss record in his final season despite him basically putting up league average numbers with the league's worst graded wide receiver group and one of the league's worst graded offensive lines? It's because these people don't do their homework. They see someone who demonstrates in a way that opposes their ideological and cultural identities, so they latch on to any anti-Kaepernick arguments they hear without doing even the minimum amount of research to challenge those arguments, because those arguments make them feel good. Those hollow football arguments make them feel good because they're unwilling to confront the cognitive dissonance that comes with supporting the collusion of an NFL player for non-football reasons, while complaining about cancel culture of the public figures they associate with. I get the feeling I'm going to have to revisit this topic in the future.